passage later this week. So the people who voted for this Corker-Hoeven-Leahy proposal pretty much voted for the bill. So we've got a pretty solid roadmap of how the yes votes are going to play out.
And Corker-Hoeven, two of those names, Republicans.
Washington Journal airs every morning live at 7 a.m. Eastern. The House is coming back in now to debate several infrastructure bills. Any requested requests for recorded votes will be postponed until 6:30.
Under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 2383.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2383, a bill to designate the new Interstate Route 70 bridge over the Mississippi River connecting St. Louis, Missouri, and southwestern Illinois as the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, and the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 2383.
Without objection.
And Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today in support of H.R. 2383 to name the I-70 bridge, the new I-70 bridge that connects St. Louis and southwestern Illinois as the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge. I introduced this legislation along with my colleague Bill Enyart, as well as Ann Wagner, John Shimkus, Lacey Clay, Dan Lipinski, Aaron Schock, Emmanuel Cleaver, Sam Graves, Vicki Hartzler, Randy Holkren, Adam Kinzinger, Billy Long, Blaine Luetkemeyer, and Jason Smith. Today marks a bipartisan opportunity to honor all of America's heroes as well as a legend of America's national pastime. Nearly 1.3 million of America's 21 million veterans live in Illinois and Missouri. Naming this bridge that links these two states is another way we can honor the brave men and the brave women who have served our country. Whether it's coming together to pass critical veterans funding measures, just like 420 of my colleagues and I did earlier this month on this very floor, or recognizing our veterans by naming this bridge, this body has shown it can come together in support of our veterans. This bill would also honor the legacy of Stan Musial. Mr. Speaker, the St. Louis Cardinals are one of the most storied and successful first-rate franchises in sports history, and the best player to ever don a St. Louis Cardinal uniform was Stan the Man Musial. Born in Donora, Pennsylvania in 1920, Stan Musial lived an amazing, inspiring life. On the field, he was a 24-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion, 3-time National League MVP, and a first-ballot Hall of Famer. He finished his career as a .331 hitter, and he was consistent, earning 1,815 hits at home and 1,815 hits on the road. During his 22-year Major League career spanning 3,026 games, he was never ejected by an umpire. These lessons in consistency and sportsmanship not only serve as a good reminder to Congress, but they are also attributes that I try to impart upon my sons and their teammates as the coach of their Little League baseball team in Taylorville, Illinois. Off the field, Stan Musial led by example. In 1945, in the prime of his career, Stan took a year off from baseball to go serve his country in World War II. Stan served in the Navy and was based at Pearl Harbor as part of a ship repair unit. There was more to Stan Musial than being an outstanding athlete who also served his country. He and his high school sweetheart, Lillian, were married for more than 70 years and had 4 children. He also served as chairman for President Johnson's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports, and in 2011, Stan was given this country's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. My first favorite player, Hank Aaron, Hall of Famer, sums it up best when he said, "I didn't just like Stan Musial, I wanted to be like Stan Musial." As an individual, Stan will be remembered as kind, modest, generous, and approachable. As an ambassador, Stan meant more to the game of baseball in St. Louis than he was ever willing to take credit for. Today, let's honor our veterans and Stan the Man Musial. I urge all my colleagues to support H.R. 2383 and reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 2383 to designate the new Interstate 70 bridge over the Mississippi River connecting Illinois and St. Louis as the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge, or the Stan Span, as many affectionately call it. This bill names the bridge in honor of one of the greatest players in baseball history, as well as the millions of brave Americans who have served this country in the armed forces. Naming the bridge after Mr. Musial and saluting the millions of Americans who have served in our armed forces is a fitting tribute to their bravery and sacrifice. Few players have contributed more to America's pastime than Stan Musial. In his 22 seasons in Major League Baseball, playing for the St. Louis Cardinals, Stan the Man was selected to the All-Star Game a record 24 times, named the National League Most Valuable Player 3 times, and played on 3 World Series championship title teams. Musial was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1969 on the first ballot. Moreover, Stan Musial's contributions go well beyond the baseball diamond. Like many of his generation, Mr. Musial served our country during World War II. During his tour of duty in the Navy, Musial joined with more than 16 million other Americans to serve our nation as members of the U.S. Armed Forces during World War II. In retirement, Stan Musial contributed his time to causes such as the USO, Senior Olympics, the Boy Scouts, and served as chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness from 1964 to 1967. Stan Musial received the Navy's Memorial Lone Sailor Award in 2007. It honors Navy veterans who excel in their civilian careers while exemplifying the Navy's core values of honor, courage, and commitment. In February 2011, President Obama presented Stan Musial with the Presidential Medal of Honor. That's the highest honor bestowed on a civilian in America. My personal appreciation of Stan Musial goes way back to my childhood growing up in Springfield, Illinois. Our family would make regular car trips every summer to Busch Stadium to cheer on our beloved Cardinals. When we weren't able to make it to games in person, we would listen to them on KMOX radio back home. I still remember the voices of Jack Buck and Harry Carey, who then would go on to announce for the Cubs. I also fondly remember waiting around Busch Stadium after the games with my brother, my sister, my mom and dad, just to catch a glimpse of some of the Cardinal greats like Curt Flood. We loved watching Lou Brock run the bases. We loved watching Bob Gibson pitch. And we just loved baseball so much that my dad later in his life would go on to work for Major League Baseball. And I'm proud to say that my brother, Dan Callahan, would be the head coach of Southern Illinois University baseball for 16 seasons until he passed away a couple years ago from cancer. As you see, my family's bond with Greater St. Louis and the Cardinals baseball is a strong one. But this bill does not just recognize the contributions of one man, but rather it salutes the service of all our veterans. Stan Musial was a hero to many, not just for the way he played baseball, but for how he lived life. Like so many of the heroes who have served this nation in our military, he lived his life with integrity and with honor. Naming this bridge in honor of Stan Musial and all veterans is a symbol of our gratitude for the sacrifices they made to protect our freedoms. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 2383 to dedicate this bridge in honor of Stan the Man Musial and all the men and women who have served our nation in the armed forces. We are proud to remember and honor all they endured for our democracy and to safeguard our safety. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I'd first like to thank my colleague and my good friend from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, for her kind comments and also for honoring her father's service to Major League Baseball and her brother's service to the youth and to the students at Southern Illinois University during his time there as the head baseball coach. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
And now, Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in honor of veterans, and one veteran in particular, one of St. Louis's all-time heroes, Stan Musial. Stan the Man Musial is best known as the greatest player in St. Louis Cardinal history, winner of 3 World Series as a player and 1 more as general manager, a member of baseball's Hall of Fame, and is one of the greatest players to ever play our beloved national pastime. However, Stan Musial was also a great patriot. He temporarily left the St. Louis Cardinals during the Second World War to serve his country in the Navy. Stan and the Cardinals had just won the 1944 World Series when Stan left to serve during the war. And after the war, he returned to his beloved St. Louis Cardinals to bring home yet another World Series championship in 1946. His athleticism and his greatness as a player are self-evident. His 3,630 hits are the 4th highest in baseball history. Stan is also one of the only 7 players to hit 400 home runs and have over 3,000 hits. A model of consistency, Stan Musial could hit a baseball anywhere he was, home or away, finishing his career with 1,815 hits at home and 1,815 hits on the road. A former teammate described Stan's tremendous talent like this: he could have hit 300 with a fountain pen. Those who had the privilege to see Stan Musial play baseball swear that he was the greatest player that they ever saw put on a St. Louis Cardinals uniform. Yet Stan the Man stood for something more than his 2 decades of sustained excellence in baseball. He was an exemplary human being. To baseball fans around the country, Stan Musial represented perfection as a ball player and as a gentleman. But to those of us from St. Louis, he represented so much more. He was our neighbor, and he was our friend. There has never been a better representative of the Cardinals or baseball, or for that matter, humanity, than Stan Musial. Carrying himself with dignity, Stan was always willing to sign an autograph and meet fans or do anything to help a friend in need. I recently asked constituents to share some of their Stan Musial memories with me, and while many of them remember watching him play baseball, it was his kindness and his humility that set him apart. One constituent told me that as a child he lived in the same neighborhood as Stan Musial. Stan would play baseball with him and other neighborhood kids during the off-season. Many from St. Louis remember Stan going out of his way to sign autographs for young fans or lend his good name to charitable and civic events. Others remember his visits to St. Louis hospitals and the joy that he brought to both patients and to the staff. But all remember that he was a happy and a joyful person who made you feel better and made you want to be a better person just by being in his presence. After he retired from baseball, Stan Musial came to nearly every Cardinals opening day because he felt it was his duty to be there for the city and the team that gave so much to him. And each year at the induction to the Baseball Hall of Fame, Stan would play "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" on his harmonica. New inductees would often mention Stan playing the harmonica as one of their favorite moments during the induction weekend. The best description of Stan was rendered by former baseball commissioner Ford C. Frick. "Here stands baseball's perfect warrior. Here stands baseball's perfect knight." These words adorn the statue of Stan Musial that sits outside Busch Stadium in St. Louis City. Mr. Speaker, I am honored to be a part of this bill that names the I-70 bridge after Stan Musial and our veterans. I urge my colleagues to support this bill as a lasting tribute to Stan the Man and all those who have served our country so honorably. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Enyart.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Ms. Bustos. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 2383, a compromise measure to name an extraordinary structure in honor of extraordinary heroes. Today, I'm proud to join my colleagues in bridging a great divide, not the aisle here in the House, dividing Democrats from Republicans, but a divide that is sometimes even wider, the mighty Mississippi River between Illinois and Missouri. Today, in the spirit of compromise, we come together to honor people we hold dear and to recognize the values that make them special to us in both Illinois and Missouri, regardless of our politics or which side of the river we call home. For millions of baseball fans in mid-America, Stan Musial was a hero. Stan spent a career accumulating Major League records and World Series rings while playing for the St. Louis Cardinals. But he was much more than one of the best baseball players to have ever played the game. No, to us in the region, he epitomized what it meant to be a resident of mid-America. He worked hard. He achieved success with humility. He was always a gentleman. In a time when society too often glorifies all that is loud, showy, and brash, Stan was the opposite. Quiet and humble, he was the textbook of integrity in all that he did. Stan the man was a hero for another reason. That's because he wore only two uniforms, one for the baseball team he loved and one for the country he loved. I'm proud to support this bill today because it recognizes not only Stan Musial, but all of our nation's veterans. As a veteran of two of our nation's armed forces, this is a commitment that is very personal to me. I represent Scott Air Force Base, just 15 minutes from the new bridge. And I'm proud to represent a district that has one of the highest percentages of veterans in the United States. The people of Southern Illinois have answered each and every time our country is called. The service and the sacrifice of our veterans and their families can't be taken for granted, nor can their service be remembered only 1 or 2 days a year. Our nation remains a beacon of freedom and liberty because of that dedication and sacrifice. So today, I'm proud to rise in support of this measure to designate the new Interstate 70 bridge linking East St. Louis, Illinois to St. Louis, Missouri, the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge. On my way to Washington, D.C. today, I passed this new bridge still under construction. The bridge cables were gleaming in the sunlight. I looked out and saw dozens of my constituents hard at work on this structure. It's much-needed infrastructure investment for our region and the country, a partnership between our states and the federal government. It's my hope that every traveler who crosses over this striking structure will not only read the name of that bridge, but will remember the values we honor with that name: hard work, integrity, humility, service, and sacrifice. These are fitting ideals for all of us, and they are a fitting reason to name this bridge in honor of Stan Musial and in honor of all our veterans. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleagues, Mrs. Wagner, for her comments and support for this bill. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Mr. Enyart, for his support and also for his service to our country. Thank you, sir. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Luke DeMeyer.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor a truly great man, a great baseball player and decorated veteran, Stan the Man Musial. Growing up a Cardinals fan, I recall watching Stan Musial from the stands of Sportsman's Park as a boy, as well as sneaking my transistor radio into my bedroom late at night so I could listen to Cardinal games so my mom and dad wouldn't know I was up late. In 1938, Musial was signed by the Cardinals as a free agent at the age of 20. He led the Cardinals to a World Series victory the following season. In May of 1944, during the midst of World War II, Musial put down his bat to serve his country for 2 years in the Navy, a service for which he later received the Navy Memorial's Lone Sailor Award. After serving his country, Musial went on to play for 20 more seasons as a Cardinal. After his 22 seasons, Musial was ranked #1 in singles, doubles, and triples among records with a single team, all records he still holds to this day. He was selected to a record 24 All-Star games and was named the National League's most valuable player 3 times, winning 3 World Series championships with the Cardinals. One of Musial's most famous feats was hitting 5 home runs in one day during a doubleheader. Musial was a first ballot inductee in the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1969. But not only was Musial a great Cardinal, the greatest to ever play the game in St. Louis, he was also a great philanthropist, an integral and valuable member of the St. Louis community. And for this humanitarian commitment and his athletic achievements, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in May of 2011 by President Obama. Though he passed away in January of 2013, Musial is remembered dearly in the hearts and minds of not only the Cardinal fans, but the entire baseball community. Mr. Speaker, I'm honored to rise in support of naming the I-70 bridge after Stan the Man and in honor of all our veterans. I urge members of this House to stand with me in unwavering support of the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentlewoman for yielding. I rise today in support of this bipartisan legislation that I am pleased to co-sponsor with my colleague and friend, Mr. Davis, to designate the new Interstate 70 bridge over the Mississippi River connecting the city of St. Louis and southwestern Illinois as the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge. As the U.S. representative who has the honor of representing the St. Louis Cardinals, it is a special privilege for me to speak about Stan Musial from the perspective of a member of Congress, and also from the memory of a young boy at Old Sportsman's Park with my dad, former Congressman Bill Clay, as we watched Stan play near the end of his remarkable career. Stan Musial was simply one of the greatest baseball players of all time. And as was noted earlier, he was elected to baseball's Hall of Fame on the first ballot. And that much is known to the world. But, Mr. Speaker, what is less known is that as a good player, as he was on the field, Stan Musial was even a better man off of the field. In his own quiet way, Stan Musial was also on the vanguard of fighting discrimination and changing America. Stan was born in the small town of Donora, Pennsylvania, the 5th of 5 children. Donora is also the hometown of baseball's famous Griffey family. As a young man, Stan was no stranger to the challenges of African Americans and the evils of segregation. Years before the desegregation of baseball in 1947, Stan, a gifted athlete, was playing basketball with Buddy Griffey, the father of the great Ken Griffey Sr. and the grandfather of the great Ken Griffey Jr. When their high school team was supposed to have dinner in a segregated hotel, Stan and the rest of the team walked out. In 1947, 6 years after Stan was called up to the Cardinals, Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And many more great black and Latino players would follow, but they faced racial taunts and threats on an almost daily basis, sometimes from the fans in the stands, sometimes from the opposing team, and sadly, sometimes from their own teammates. And when some white players on the St. Louis Cardinals threatened to boycott the game if they were forced to play with blacks, Musial stood tall for justice and stopped the boycott before it started. When Stan died, stories from those difficult days were told with great reverence and respect. Upon hearing of his death, Hall of Famer Willie Mays recalled a story from an All-Star game in the 1950s. Before the game, in one corner of the National League clubhouse, sat Mays, Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, and Frank Robinson, playing cards all by themselves. The white ball players on the National League roster either ignored them or were openly hostile. So Stan Musial, who by then was one of the biggest stars in the game, simply walked over, sat down, and said, "Deal me in." And that was his way of saying, fellas, you belong here. It's going to get better, and I'm glad to have you on my team. When asked about his friend's passing, the great Hank Aaron, baseball's legitimate all-time home run king, and someone who faced much hateful racism himself, said this of Stan, and I quote, "I not only liked Stan Musial, I wanted to be like Stan Musial." 2 years ago, I was privileged to accompany Stan and his family to the White House as President Obama awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And the President said this about Stan, quote, "His brilliance could come in blinding bursts, hitting 5 home runs in a single doubleheader, leading the league in singles, doubles, triples, and RBIs over a single season. Stan Musial made that brilliance burn for 2 decades. Even as he missed a season in his prime to serve his country in the U.S. Navy during World War II, Stan remains to this day an icon, untarnished, a beloved pillar of the community, a gentleman you'd want your kids to emulate." Mr. Speaker, that is absolutely true, and soon when millions of Americans cross the beautiful new bridge that will bear his name. Mr. Speaker, I ask for one addition.
Give a minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And when millions of Americans cross that new bridge that will bear his name, I hope they will remember that Stan Musial was more than just a proud veteran and a great ball player. His life and legacy truly symbolize the best of the greatest generation. I thank my colleagues from Missouri and Illinois for supporting this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'd like to thank my colleague, Mr. Luetkemeyer, and my colleague, Mr. Clay. And thank you for your service. Thank you for the stories about Stan Musial being the man when it came to a difficult time in Major League history. And I'd also like to thank you and thank your father. Thank you for your father's service, too. And at this time, Mr. Speaker, I wish to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, from Collinsville, Mr. Shimkus.
The gentleman is reminded to direct your remarks to the chair. The gentleman is recognized from Illinois. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think those comments were to Mr. Davis. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to one of baseball's greatest and St. Louis heroes of all time, Stan Musial. Stan the man was an unblemished icon, both on and off the field. Musial's historic numbers over his 22 seasons with the St. Louis Cardinals make him one of the greatest to ever play the game, with 3,630 hits, 475 home runs, 1,951 RBIs, and a lifetime .331 batting average. He was one of the most consistent hitters of his era. Musial's performance on the field earned him 24 All-Star appearances, 3 National League MVP awards, 7 National League batting titles, and a rightful place in the Hall of Fame, and 3 World Series championships for Cardinals Nation. Stan the man was immortalized in the hearts of Cardinals fans when his number 6 was retired and his statue was erected outside Busch Stadium with a fitting quote from Baseball Commissioner Ford Frick. And I quote, "Here stands baseball's perfect warrior. Here stands baseball's perfect knight." But Stan Musial was more than just an example of baseball excellence. He epitomized modest Midwestern values and a devout faith, rarely found in today's age of fame and record contracts. When fellow baseball great Ty Cobb compared Musial to other greats and said he was better than Joe DiMaggio, Musial humbly replied, "Cobb is baseball's greatest. I don't want to contradict him, but I can't say that I was ever as good as Joe DiMaggio." Stan Musial lived his faith through his life as a devout Catholic, his charitable work, and his devotion to his family, with nearly 72 years of marriage and 4 children. For his lifetime of work and service, Stan Musial earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2011, as Lacey so aptly identified. It is fitting that we name the I-70 bridge the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge to remember his service to our nation, as well as that of countless other veterans in the St. Louis area and Cardinals Nation. Like so many other young men and women of his generation, Stan Musial put aside his career when he was drafted into the United States Navy during World War II. With the passing of Stan Musial, we lost a beacon of our community and our team, but this legislation is a fitting tribute to a player who will always be remembered in the hearts of Cardinals fans as the man. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank Congresswoman Bustos for managing this bill with me today. It's been an honor. I'd also like to thank Congressman Enyart, Congresswoman Wagner, Congressman Shimkus, Congressman Clay, and Congressman Luetkemeyer for coming to the floor today in support of H.R. 2383. Mr. Speaker, I'd also be remiss not to thank former Congressman Jerry Costello for his vision to turn this bridge from an idea into a reality, and I'd like to honor him today, too, for his service to our country as a member of Congress. I urge all of my colleagues to support this legislation so that we can honor our veterans and Stan the Man Musial. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 2383? Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1092.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
House Calendar Number 30, H.R. 1092, a bill to designate the Air Route Traffic Control Center located in Nashua, New Hampshire, as the Patricia Clark Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, and the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 1092.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill honors the work and commitment of Mrs. Patricia Clark for her 60 years of federal service. Mrs. Clark began working at Boston Center in Nashua, New Hampshire in 1963 when it first opened, and has worked there ever since. In her years at Boston Center, Mrs. Clark has never taken annual or sick leave. According to her colleagues, Mrs. Clark's dedication to her job is as impressive as her length of service to the FAA. To recognize her dedication, Mrs. Clark's colleagues decided that it was appropriate to celebrate Boston Center's 50th anniversary by renaming it in her honor. The dedication and hard work of federal employees like Mrs. Clark should not be overlooked. I voice my support and encourage my colleagues to support this bill, which recognizes the work of an exemplary federal employee. I want to clarify that while honoring Mrs. Clark, this bill does not require any funding for the renaming of the Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of H.R. 1092 to designate the Air Route Traffic Control Center located in Nashua, New Hampshire, as the Patricia Clark Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center. The Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure unanimously reported this bill by voice vote just last month. Ms. Clark has worked in the Nashua Center since it opened on March 31, 1963, and she provided more than 50 years of government service. Ms. Clark does administrative work at the center, including payroll, mail processing, and travel arrangements, and has not taken a single sick day in her long career. Ms. Clark's managers and colleagues at the Federal Aviation Administration initiated the idea of naming the facility to honor her for her valued service. Mr. Speaker, this is an important bill introduced by the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer, and other members of the New Hampshire delegation. This bill is a companion bill to S-540, which passed the Senate by unanimous consent earlier this year. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 1092. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize and thank my colleague, Ms. Custer, from New Hampshire for introducing this piece of legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Hampshire, Ms. Custer.
The gentlewoman from New Hampshire is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ms. Bustos, for yielding. I rise today in support of H.R. 1092, a bill that I introduced with Congresswoman Shea Porter to rename the Air Traffic Control Center in Nashua, New Hampshire, after Patricia Clark, an exemplary federal employee. I want to thank Senator Shaheen and Senator Ayotte for leading this legislation and ensuring its swift passage through the other body. I also thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal for their hard-working staff for passing this bill through the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and bringing it to the floor today. The Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center was built 50 years ago as part of a network of 20 centers that guide commercial air traffic in our nation. The center is staffed by a dedicated team which ensures the safety of our skies and the aircraft that travel through them. But while much has changed in the 50 years since the center was opened, one thing has remained constant: Patty Clark. Patty started work at the Boston Center the day after it opened, and since that time, she has been the gold standard for federal employees. Patty does administrative work, including payroll, travel arrangements, and manning the phones. And as you've heard today, over these past 50 years, she has never once taken a sick day. Patty is beloved by her colleagues for her dedication and her positive attitude. To quote one of her colleagues, she is simply the cream of the crop. So as the 50th anniversary of the Boston Center approached earlier this year, management and workers got together at the center and decided that the only way to appropriately mark this extraordinary milestone is to honor the woman who has been through it all. This is no-cost, bipartisan legislation that will recognize the dedication of an incredible woman who has served our nation for 50 years. I urge my colleagues to join me and the entire New Hampshire congressional delegation in honoring Patty Clark by supporting H.R. 1092. I again thank Chairman Schuster and Ranking Member Rahal, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I too yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to personally thank Mrs. Clark for all her years of dedicated service. This is truly an honor, benefiting a federal employee of her high caliber. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this important piece of legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 1092? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds.
I demand that the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking the vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 2289 to rename Section 219C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as the K. Bailey Hutchison Spousal IRA.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2289, a bill to rename Section 219C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as the K. Bailey Hutchison Spousal IRA.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Johnson, and the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the subject of the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Today we are considering legislation to rename the spousal IRA the K. Bailey Hutchison Spousal IRA. I want to thank my colleagues from both sides of the aisle for co-sponsoring these bills. Mr. Speaker, a fellow Texan, an extraordinary woman, and the first Texas female United States Senator, K. Bailey Hutchison established during her time in the Senate a long and distinguished record of service to the great people of Texas and to Americans across our nation. A fitting example of the Senator's service is her successful effort to help families save for retirement. Back in 1993, Senator Hutchison first led the effort to change an unfair tax rule that limited the ability of homemakers to fully contribute to their own personal retirement accounts, known as IRAs. At that time, homemakers could only put aside $250 in an IRA as opposed to $2,000, the maximum allowed for the working spouse. In response, Senator Hutchison introduced legislation allowing homemakers to fully contribute to their own accounts. In 1996, Congress passed legislation that included the Senator's proposal to do just that. As a result, homemakers are no longer penalized for undertaking the important work of raising a family when it comes to saving for retirement. As the Senator said back in 1996, and I quote, "There is no question in my mind that the work done inside the home is as much a part of the American family, if not more important to the American family, than the work done outside the home," unquote. I can't think of a better way to recognize the now former Senator's efforts to make it easier for families to achieve retirement security than by renaming the spouse IRA the Kay Bailey Hutchison Spousal IRA. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank our colleague from Dallas, Texas, Mr. Johnson, for his leadership on this matter. This spring, in another part of Texas, in San Antonio, with the committed leadership of Katie Flato, we had our first ever Texas Book Festival, Bexar County edition. Among the many authors who were celebrated there, an active presence to make this book festival a success was our United States Senator and New York Times best-selling author Kay Bailey Hutchison, who presented her new book, Unflinching Courage, Pioneering Women Who Shaped Texas. In this book, she takes a look at other women who have made Texas and this nation what it is today. She tells some incredible stories, from Jane Long, who's often called the mother of Texas, and her delivery of her own baby on a beach, to the tale of Margaret Houston, the wife of the hero of Texas, Sam Houston, who reportedly had an operation to remove a tumor, bit on a silver coin, survived, and had 6 more children. Well, Senator Hutchison was a pioneer in her own right, graduating, as my colleague said, from the University of Texas School of Law in 1967, when the number of women in the graduating class was in single digits. As the first Republican woman to be elected to the Texas House of Representatives, she served there and in the Texas Constitutional Convention, where I had an opportunity to get to know her as another member of that convention, as well as her husband, Ray Hutchison, who served with distinction in the House of Representatives. She is to date our only woman to have represented Texas in the United States Senate. We're grateful for her long service, her willingness to work with members of both parties, and in San Antonio we're particularly grateful as well for her service as it relates to the San Antonio River and the expansion of the Riverwalk. When she first came to the Senate in 1993, she began working on legislation to help women take charge of their own futures, and one part of that is the spousal IRA. The bill was the product of her own personal experience. When she married Ray, she learned that she could no longer contribute $2,000 to her retirement annually, but was limited to $250. Early on, she approached Senator Barbara Mikulski about becoming a Democratic lead sponsor on the spousal IRA bill, and together, Senator Hutchison, working in a bipartisan manner with Senator Mikulski, got the legislation approved as a part of the Small Business Job Protection Act of 1996. The spousal IRA that became law is an important tax benefit for stay-at-home spouses. It allows the stay-at-home spouse to make a full IRA contribution to the stay-at-home spouse's own IRA, even if a husband or wife has made a full contribution to the working spouse's IRA. In a time when too many people are not saving enough to provide a secure retirement, this measure helps many contribute to assure that they have a full retirement. Under the rules in place before, that limitation would have been a very nominal $250. Under Senator Hutchison's legislation, the contribution can now go up to $5,500, so a big contribution each year. So I think it's very appropriate that we honor Senator Hutchison here with the naming that is proposed, and I yield back, I reserve the balance of my time at this point.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, a member of the Ways and Means Committee and chairman of the Subcommittee on Health.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Johnson, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and to Mr. Doggett for your eloquent support. You know, when American families are fortunate to have children, they often face an important decision. Can they afford to have one parent stay at home to care for the children, or is it financially necessary that both parents continue to work outside the home? Well, if they choose to have one parent, a mom or a dad, stay home, it's often a great financial sacrifice that affects not only their day-to-day living but their retirement security as well. I believe the government should support their decision by encouraging them to save for their retirement by using the spousal IRA tax provision, which became law in 1996. This provision brings a measure of equality to the code and allows parents to contribute to IRA retirement accounts whether they work outside the home or not. While the spousal IRA provision was included in the contract with America, in the contract with the American family, it only exists today because of our dear friend and former Texas Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. Years ago, she recognized the unfairness of the tax code to those moms and dads who chose to stay home with their children, even if it meant missing out on the usual tax incentives enjoyed by those with outside jobs who were putting money away in a traditional IRA as a nest egg. Well, stay-at-home parents didn't have that IRA option, so the senator went to work to balance the scales a little for those parents. I remember Senator Hutchison for years tirelessly crisscrossing the state of Texas and lobbying her colleagues in the House and the Senate for a spousal IRA because it was the right thing to do for our families and families across the country. She never stopped raising awareness of this inequity, and she never gave up. And I think all of us would agree that never giving up is a Kay Bailey Hutchison hallmark. She also turned her incredible energy to getting it passed in Congress. She was finally and justifiably successful in 1996, working across the aisle with leaders like Dick Armey and the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Bill Archer, but also signed by and supported by President Clinton. Since that time, millions of American children have benefited from their stay-at-home parents, and their parents have benefited from Senator Hutchison's magnificent work to bring some retirement fairness to these wonderful families. Therefore, I join with my colleagues to urge them to vote in support of renaming the spousal IRA, the tax code, the Kay Bailey Hutchison spousal IRA. It's an honor much deserved by the one person most responsible for its existence. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett. The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
The chair recognizes Mr. Burgess for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and it is a pleasure to join my friends from Texas on the floor today to honor Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison and the work that she did with creating the spousal IRA. Look, back in the 1990s, I was just a regular guy practicing medicine back home in Texas. What did I know about this stuff? Well, not much. But what I did know, that for 15 years that I'd been in private practice, my wife and I had shared our contribution to our IRAs every year. That meant each of us was able to deposit $1,100 every year into the IRA account. Well, I got to tell you, it's pretty frustrating to try to save for retirement when every year your contribution is limited to that rather austere amount. So it was a very big day, and I remember that day when we actually both were able to make the full contribution to our IRA accounts, and it was because of the hard work done by Senator Hutchison. She never forgot her constituents back in Texas. She never forgot the women who, yes, women in the workforce, but also those women who were exercising their option to spend all of their energies raising their children and raising their families. It was a great day for Texas, for Texas constituents when that tax bill was passed, and we're very grateful to Senator Hutchison for her leadership. It is appropriate that we honor her tonight with the naming of the spousal IRA in her honor. I thank the gentleman for the recognition, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To close briefly, last fall, Senator Cornyn hosted a memorable bipartisan dinner honoring Senator Hutchison, appropriately in the LBJ room here in the Capitol, at which all of us who are gathered here today and a number of our colleagues joined in honoring Senator Hutchison. At about the same time, Senator Mikulski introduced a resolution in the Senate to accomplish the same objective as this resolution. I hope the Senate will act promptly to approve the legislation. It has strong bipartisan support because this is an important measure to assure more retirement security provided by a Texas leader in which those of us of both parties can take pride, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Doggett, for your words. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill in honor of Senator Hutchison's common sense effort to make it easier for families to save for retirement. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 2289? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess until approximately 6:30 p.m. today.